My SEC title game is LSU and Texas, and I feel great about both those teams. But when you say that game out loud and what it's going to be for the SEC championship, man, the further it goes, I feel a little silly not having Georgia in Atlanta playing for the SEC. History isn't everything, especially in college football, but history is usually a pretty good reference for things as we move forward, especially when there is a key common denominator in that history, which in this context is Kirby Smart. History says 7 of the last 8 SEC title games have included Georgia. The one game that Georgia didn't play in for the SEC championship was in 2020, and I think you put a total asterisk next to that year in general with COVID. So if Kirby Smart's the head coach, you can feel pretty confident putting Georgia in your SEC title game. Again, I don't have that, and I'm not backing off my logic because I think LSU is going to the national championship. I think Texas is going to be real freaking good. But you start to talk it through as you get closer to the season, which is what this whole part of the show is about. Like, do I really think that the issues with Georgia a year ago are going to persist and carry over into 2025 with Kirby Smart as the head coach? Because what were the issues last year? Outside of the injuries, which that in itself you could talk about. I don't think Georgia will be nearly as snake-bitten when it comes to injuries. But the concerns around Georgia last year was offensive line play, couldn't really run the football that well, and tackling. Okay, Kirby Smart, if you've been listening to what he's been saying throughout the entirety of fall camp, is those things, whether it be stopping the run or running the football, those are about your culture and your coaching staff demanding that and pulling it out of your roster, pulling it out of those position groups to then go execute on the field. And maybe somewhere else, that's just cliche. Like maybe at a FCS school, it's kind of like, hey, we demand to run the football. It's like, yeah, coach, but you got a bunch of Jimmies and Joes and a bunch of guys that, you know, maybe are walk-on kind of caliber players at a FBS level. It doesn't matter how bad you want to run the football. It doesn't actually translate to results, even though you want it so badly, you're going to demand it so badly. At a place like Georgia, when you demand to run the football with the caliber of player they have on the offensive and defensive line, you probably should get results. If that's going to be your emphasis, your priority, all those things, if you're going to focus on running the football and stopping the run, and that's going to be all you care about, you're going to be able to do that with how Kirby Smart has recruited. Like tackling in itself, I mean, Caden Smith knows this, producer for the hard count, 2-time All-Sun Belt safety. Like tackling a lot of the time, it's a want-to thing. Like, a lot of the time, I know there's some dudes that are just freak shows running the football or freak shows when it comes to what they are tackling, but like at the end of the day, usually it's one will versus the other will, technique versus technique, repetition versus repetition. Like, have you prepared enough for this moment? Do you want it badly enough to go tackle that guy with the football? All right? It's a want-to thing a lot of the time. All right? So for Georgia, some people are maybe questioning like the overall roster talent they have relative to the rest of the sport, because long gone are the days where Georgia just cherry picks every single 5-star and they show up there with 35 stars and you got one. Those days are long gone because the portal exists and player mobility exists and NIL exists and all that. But here's the thing. Even if Georgia's not 3 deep on the defensive line like they used to be, they're still, 2-ish deep? And the rest of college football is trying to be 2-ish deep, where Georgia has more depth than I think the rest of the sport still. Like, even with the playing field, quote-unquote, leveling for the rest of the sport with what Georgia has on their roster, Georgia still has more than everybody else. And Kirby Smart has said as much at different pressers throughout the course of his time at Georgia in the last year or so with the evolution of the portal. Hey, the sport itself is deteriorating with how we build our roster. Yeah, we have less depth here at Georgia. We still have more than the rest of the people we're playing, more often than not. So going back to what I said a second ago, if those are your questions about Georgia in 2024, if Kirby Smart is prioritizing those things being fixed, I feel pretty good about them being fixed in 2025. Why? Because that's his DNA. Defensive coach, he's not going to settle for his team not tackling well 2 years in a row. Also, we know what defensive coaches, when it comes to what they do on offense, want to run the ball. Georgia's going to run the football just fine here in 2025. I feel pretty confident saying that. So what I'm not as sure about relative to this discussion with Georgia being in the SEC title game, a big reason why I didn't have him in this game, I'm not sure about Gunnar Stockton just yet. I'm not. And that's, I don't think, unfair because we've seen him start, one football game in the playoff, and he played well. I thought he played well when he came in against Texas as well in the SEC title game a year ago. But he's less talented than what they had with Carson Beck throwing the football for the duration of last season. Okay? How much does that matter? I think is a fair question to push back with there, which is what I'm doing during this segment. On paper, was Stetson Bennett like more talented than a Jacob Eason or a Jacob Fromm or a Justin Fields? No. Now, what was around him was still really freaking good. I'm not discounting what that defense was for him in 2021, but you hear what I'm saying here. Like, at a certain level, with a roster like Georgia, I think your quarterback just has to be an activator. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't have to totally make sense. It doesn't have to be a thing where, he's got a bunch of stars next to his name, which, to be fair, Gunnar Stockton did have a lot of stars next to his name as a prospect. But it just kind of has to work. Your quarterback has to fit your system and, again, activate the rest of what you have on that offense. I'm no psychologist. I'm no lip reader. But I was watching the way that team responded to Gunnar Stockton when he came into the game against Texas, how that team responded to him when he was in the game against Notre Dame. That looked like a roster that was activating relative to Gunnar Stockton, relative to him being their guy, rallying around him, being down to go to war for 14. At a place like Georgia, with how much talent they have, I think that's all you need. I think that's really what makes the biggest difference. So, am I changing my pick for the SEC championship right now? Not necessarily. But I don't feel great as we get closer and closer to the season not having Georgia in that title game. So if we're wrong, won't be surprised. But I think Georgia, with the Gunnar Stockton activation factor, with how talented they are, with Kirby Smart fixing things from one year to the next, I think Georgia a bit motivated, chip on their shoulder. And if that's the case, Georgia is going to be a problem, I think, for the SEC and the rest of college football. For the record, I do have them in the playoff, in case that was any question. We're not disrespecting Georgia quite that much.